Barrie here, Best China Info, and I would very happy to welcome Brian of New Atlas to be in conversation. Brian, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
My name is Brian Berletic. I'm an independent geopolitical analyst. I'm based in Bangkok, Thailand, where I've lived for about 17 years now. And before that, I was a U.S. Marine right out of high school. Wow. I was based in Japan for most of my time there. I was never in combat, but I think I got to see enough of what we were doing overseas, even to our own supposed allies, to be disillusioned. And by the time I was getting out of the Marine Corps, the war in Iraq was just starting. And I didn't even want to live in the US because I didn't want that done in my name. That's why I moved to Asia and Thailand in particular.
Wow. Now that is huge news to me, because I wasn't aware of this, of your military history. I mean, that's both of us have been in the army. Well, obviously you're the Marines, but so that's huge news. So I have to ask a question. What made you, what turned you, if you know what I mean?
All growing up, I mean, Americans like to think that we're free thinking, but I think we are thoroughly brainwashed with patriotism. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with patriotism in just as a basic concept, but it's being abused. I wanted to sign up to protect my country, and I thought that's what I would be doing. But I had family members warn me, no, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to be fighting wars overseas, etc. So I had, even in my own family, they supported me, but they warned me. And when the minute I was, because I got to Paris Island for basic training, I realized this is not what I signed up for. The kind of people that they were bringing in to meet quotas. And not really, there's a lot of great people in the military, there are, but there's a lot of people that just shouldn't be there. Yeah. And they're there because the US military is about something else other than protecting the US. So I was already kind of disillusioned from the very beginning, but what actually really did it for me was 9/11. 9/11 came, and we all thought, oh, we're all going to go to war, and and we were all angry. We all were. It worked. It was a very effective way of mobilizing people for war. Yeah. But then they never sent me or my unit. We didn't go anywhere. And as the time went by, I started thinking, know your enemy, right? Sun Tzu, Art of War, know your enemy. I thought, if these people are really our enemies, I should know them. And I started reading the Quran from cover to cover. And I started to realize all these quotes that they were cherry picking out of the Quran to depict Islam as this savage, radical religion. It was all lies. It was taken out of context deliberately to basically smear an entire religion of 1 billion people. Yeah. And then we started, once you realize that, you start digging in, like, where did the Al Qaeda come from? What was their genesis? And then before you realize it, you're like, what we created? I even had, even before that, I had a chief warrant officer in my unit say, we created bin Laden. Right. Yeah, he's a chief warrant officer, spent his whole life in the Marine Corps. And even he said the day after 9/11, he's like, we created bin Laden. So this is like the chickens coming home to roost. Yeah. So even at that, there was like a level of awareness, even in the military, that this wasn't all adding up. Yeah. And it just, one thing went to the other. I started opening my eyes wide to the abuses we were doing in countries that were supposedly our allies. And and then you just one day you really just have a wake up moment where you're this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. Yeah.
And did you move from Japan? You were based in Japan, then back to the States, and then opted for Thailand?
Yes, because when I was based in Japan, Okinawa, we would do exercises on Okinawa. It was an artillery unit, so we couldn't fire artillery on Okinawa. It's a very small island. Okay. So we would go either to mainland Japan or the Philippines or Thailand to do these live fire exercises. So I had spent time in Thailand
Okay.
part of Cobra Gold, these annual exercises.
Yeah.
And so that's how I knew about Thailand. And then when I went back to the US to get out of the Marines, you have to, check out in the US. And then as soon as I was done, I went back to Thailand.
Okay. So there's a similarity in our paths. We were both in the military. You probably put more time in than I did. And then eventually hit the point where it's like, I can't live in this place anymore. I disagree with the whole thing. And then we leave. So that's very interesting. And you mentioned your eyes open and then you start to dig, you start to look. So, well, hold on, what actually is going on? And then you, as you said, you realize who created all this stuff in the first place, because they play one side off against another, they create the enemies. And then if you go back further and you look at go back to the Crusades, and it's the same ball game, it's this wars of religion fought by the church and on behalf of the 1%, and nothing's really changed.
Yeah. And, when you start looking at Al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood or any of these extremist groups, you start to see that it's got nothing to do with religion. They're using religion as camouflage for what is purely a power, geopolitical gameplay. And, if you wanted to get the people involved in 9/11, according to the official narrative, they were mostly Saudis.
Yeah.
And the couple that weren't Saudi were indoctrinated by Saudi state-sponsored radicalism. So why were we've invaded every country in the region except for Saudi Arabia? It just never added up. That was like
it doesn't scan. I mean, my suspicion lies in another Middle Eastern country, begins with an I and ends with an L, but there you go. That's for another time.
Yeah, it's a huge piece on the game board for sure.
Yeah. So I'm just going to share a screen, Brian, if I may, because this is where I guess I first kind of encountered your good self, which is, excuse me while I do this, on my website, I found this great writing about the Turkish Uyghur terror, America's other Al-Qaeda. And this goes all the way back to the 1970s, the Grey Walls, Turkey, and this network, this insidious network that goes way back, and these preparations all seem to have always been in place. And looking at, I know from your videos and our conversations how wide this is, not even getting into the realm of NGOs, but in terms of geopolitics. It seems that the whole of the Middle East is constantly occupied and manipulated as a geopolitical chess piece, because it is central to this whole thing. And who controls this area, from what I've read and from what I understand, who controls this central landmass controls everything.
Yes, and I mean, that's what I always recommend people do when you're trying to decipher any given conflict in a specific country. Don't try to look through it through a lens of ideology or myopically focus on just that country, because everything is happening in a much wider geopolitical context. It's a whole game board. If you're playing chess and you just focused on 2 or 3 squares, you're going to lose the game. You're not even going to know what's going on.
Yeah.
You're not going to know if you're winning or losing. And so people got to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. I think when people do, and if they study history, World War I, World War II, if they look at how World War II played out, that's kind of like what's happening right now, just through hybrid and asymmetrical warfare and economic warfare. The different fronts are all the same. It's just being fought through a very different means.
Yeah.
And slow motion also it's not as fast paced. But
there's this thing. If we don't learn from our history, we're doomed to relive it. And it seems we can't get away from this thing. And now we've talked a little bit about the Middle East, and your knowledge is greater than mine. But I suppose this then spills eastwards to, from our perspective, the borders of China, which has included Hong Kong, the Hong Kong situation, as we know, Thailand, they tried to kick off in Thailand. Myanmar, I shudder to think of the horrors that are going on in Myanmar right now. But you're more aware of this than me. I think you're more clued up. So what they tried in Hong Kong, they tried in Thailand. And how's that situation right now?
But the protests have not gained traction. And I mean, they act as if this protest just popped up like within the last year or two. But there was a military coup in 2014, and they were ousting the sister of this billionaire Thaksin Shinawatra, who he has like a people power movement, and they wear red shirts and they pretend like they're communists, and they're led by these burned out fake revolutionaries from the 1960s. But he's a billionaire, and during his time as prime minister, he was serving U.S. interests the entire time. He was selling the country out. He sent Thai troops to Iraq. He hosted the CIA torture dungeons. There's a long list of things that he did. And then when he was ousted in a military coup in 2006, he had the largest lobbying firms in Washington backing him. And it's clear, if people just read, say, the BBC or CNN or Reuters, just look at how they cover the protests here in Thailand right now and how they talk about the Thai military and the constitutional monarchy. You can tell which side they're on and who they want to get out of power and who they want to get into power. It's very clear. And right now, the protests have stalled because it's exactly like in Hong Kong. They went on for too long. They got violent. Their demands are irrelevant to ordinary people. That democracy, freedom, all these abstract concepts that ordinary people in Thailand already really actually have. And there's more important things, especially with the crisis right now, the health crisis and the economic crisis. That's what people care about. The opposition is just compounding the problem. So,
So you don't think that that's going to get much further? You say it's not got much traction.
It's not, but you have to be very careful because like for right now, you see how China has kind of gotten back to normal after the whole COVID thing. Thailand cannot do that because the government does not have control over the media. Half of the media is reporting for sensationalism to get clicks, and the other half is sided with the opposition. And they want to compound the crisis because they think that maybe that's the way they can get people out into the street. So you have to be very careful. These things can always flip around and get out of control. Should never underestimate.
They're always looking for another way to open things back up. As with Hong Kong, the law has been implemented, peace theoretically restored, and yet an on-duty police officer is stabbed and nearly murdered. And so that they're going to keep going.
Yes, absolutely. They're not going to give up. If you look at the opposition groups here in Thailand, even though they're unpopular amongst the Thai people, it doesn't matter because they don't get their support from the Thai people. They get it from Washington. They get it through the National Endowment for Democracy. So there's millions of baht. Thai baht is the currency in Thailand. They get millions of Thai baht, which is the equivalent of getting like millions of dollars because everything is cheaper here. And these groups can just protest forever, no matter how unpopular they are.
And with the US ability to just keep printing money because of the dollar hegemony. The petrodollar, they can print as much as they like and give away as much as they like. So there has been up to now a limitless fund.
Yes, and that's one factor. The other factor is America is a big country. It has a huge economy. They don't use tax dollars for infrastructure or anything constructive at home. They use it for empire building abroad, and part of empire building is building these networks that they enter into the political space of other countries, and they divide it and try to destroy it. And the exact same thing is happening in Myanmar next door. And so if we're going to lay this out, we could lay this out as China is in the middle, and they're doing this campaign of encirclement around China. So Thailand is actually a very important target for the US because The high-speed rail is almost complete in Laos, which is just north of Thailand. So you go from Kunming through Laos into Thailand, and then the high-speed rail is under construction here, but it's going to take a little bit longer. So if they could disrupt that, that would be a huge blow to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
So the BRI.
And of course, Myanmar. Yes, and then of course Myanmar, they have pipelines and infrastructure projects, a port in southwest Myanmar, and so all of this chaos in Myanmar is going to disrupt that. Then they're in Afghanistan, and they're backing, the violent Uyghur separatists. So that's another part of everywhere the Belt and Road is going. U.S. is stirring up political instability, up to and including terrorism. And in Afghanistan's case, a U.S. military occupation.
And of course, these networks, you mentioned terrorism and extremists, separatists, whatever, they have all been bred and trained in all these proving grounds throughout the Middle East. And now, as we've seen, can be deployed anywhere. They can be pushed into Xinjiang, they can be used in Afghanistan. And of course, now they can be pushed northwards to the borders of Russia.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very sure that was the plan, especially with the 2011 Arab Spring. The whole plan there was to collapse those nations or get client regimes into place, create a united front against Iran. And all of these terrorist groups that we see the US arming and using against the government in Damascus, they wanted to then take them through Iran and then over the Caucasus into southern Russia. That was the whole plan. And as a matter of fact, last year we saw Turkey bring Syrian mercenaries to Azerbaijan, right on Russia's southern border. So I mean that was the whole plan. It was just watered down because they ran out of time and Russia's intervention.
Now, I have you mentioned a name here. You mentioned the word Turkey. Now I'm puzzled about Turkey because, on one hand, the story goes that the Turkish president, his name escapes me. Jesus Christ, what's his name? Erdogan. His bacon was saved because Putin warned him. This is the story I heard, that Putin warned him, they're coming for you. You need to get out. This was a story I heard, and I think it's an open secret. And then Erdogan seems to have turned against Putin, despite the fact, and then you have this whole thing with S-400s. And Turkey, to me, is a puzzle, because it's like, well, hold on, whose side are they on? Are they in NATO? Are they Putin's friend? And what's your take on that, Brian?
I'd like to share my screen, and I'll let you in on maybe a little secret here. Can you see this?
I can.
So this is the Atlas of Economic Complexity. This is put out by Harvard University. And what it allows you to do is see a very visualized representation of a country's trade around the world. So this is, where did Turkey import from in 2018? And when all of this blue would be Europe, green is Asia, red is North America, and then there's these other regions. And you can see for Turkey how it's like it's very balanced. If you were to look at Thailand, for example, let's see. Actually, this is Taiwan, okay? Because we were going to talk about Taiwan. If you look at Taiwan, you can see how lopsided in favor of China and Asia Taiwan's trade is. So if you look at Turkey, you can see how balanced everything is. Money is power, and so Turkey is doing this balancing act. Let's see if we could look at exports also. It's kind of the same, and you see how Asia is kind of behind. And if you look for Russia, it's like hardly on here.
I see. That's a very interesting map.
Yeah, and I use metrics like that all the time, because the old adage is money is power. And,
Follow the money.
So where does exactly. And so Turkey, that's what their trade situation looks right now. And this is them trying to balance their relations between East and West. And they know that China is the future. They know Russia would be a formidable adversary to make. I don't think they really want to go too far in that direction. But they're looking at this right now, and this is what I believe, because as you said, Turkey really is a puzzle because they flip-flop all the time. It's very hard, and I mean they did play a key role, and I would say an unforgivable role in the destruction of Syria. And it's like that wasn't just politics. That was a crime against humanity that was done there, and they were a key player in that. So
I mean, thank you for that, because I really appreciate that explanation. Follow the money, and now it makes sense that Turkey will play as many sides as possible because it suits their balance of trade. It suits their money. Do you think there's aside from Russia, China, the US, Turkey, do you think there is a key geopolitical chess piece, a key country or a key state that maybe holds an answer to all of this puzzle, and that maybe could swing the game one way or the other?
I think the game is going to be swung, and I think we see it happening. And I think that this is the source of the unprecedented tensions that we see now, especially between the US and China. It's because of China rising and Asia as a whole rising. Actually, let me just show, because I'm in Thailand, let me just show you. There's another very interesting thing that tool allows us to do. Let me just go back to that real quick. Okay, can you see this? This is Thailand 2018. And you could see how Asia as a whole dominates Thailand's trade, and you can see how China plus Hong Kong, because you have to add Hong Kong, is way more than the US. But if we go back, let's say we go back to, this is 2018, let's go back to 1998. And we can see how it's inverted 180 degrees. We can see how the US dominates, and the US together with Europe, how it's almost even with all of Asia. And then of course Japan is an obedient, has been subordinated to US foreign policy. And then 2008, you could see how things started to change. China is right here, plus Hong Kong, and then back to 2018. We can see that, and even the short amount of time, well, short 17 years is kind of short when you're talking about the span of history. You could see the transition here in Thailand from the influence the West had over Thailand to Thailand getting out from under the shadow of American hegemony and enjoying its sovereignty and enjoying this relationship with China. You could see it every day in very tangible ways.
I'm talking about following the money, the hegemony, the power of the dollar. I've noted, as I'm sure many people have, that there is a kind of a definite split in the West between, for example, Wall Street, generally speaking. I'm not talking about the Wall Street Journal, but Wall Street generally are quite happy with China because there's business, there's trade. Whereas the split in the West, as I see it, is between the MIC, the MIPAC, whatever you want to call them. There's a split between the military, between the Pentagon and Wall Street. And I wonder, is there anything that could heal that divide? Or are the MIC really just a bunch of psychotic nutcases who are going to drive everything to the wall if they can?
I think that is really what's going to happen here. You see a lot of companies, they're not benefiting from, when the US was doing their trade war with China, US companies were not benefiting. They didn't want to do that, and they were suffering because of it. Just as you say, there's a concentrated elite on Wall Street, part of Wall Street, and in Washington, definitely. And it is corporations like arms manufacturers. I think there's a lot of banks that kind of see their power base threatened and eroding, and large established monopolies that have thrived because they were monopolies and there was no competition. They are threatened. They are the ones driving this, and they are the ones sponsoring these think tanks that drum up all of this aggressive policy towards China and the rest of the world.
Everything from the Atlantic Council to the NED and the ASPI. And indeed, the BBC could be called a think tank just now.
There's not much I don't think there's much thinking going on at the BBC.
Well, there's directing. Oh, we were going to talk about the BBC briefly, weren't we? And the banks and the money. Now, my own team, now I was accused by the BBC in their article, Barry is a conspiracy theorist. I'm going to bounce this one out anyway, being as I've been accused of it. That my opinion is that there are a certain elite in the banking order that will have always played both sides. They put money here, they put money there. They play both sides off because they always, and they will always profit from the chaos that ensues. And one way or another, whoever wins, the bank always wins. Their headquarters, in my opinion, is Israel. So that's my conspiracy theory. And I think, well, okay, if they're going to continue with this divide and conquer, we profit either way because we play both sides. What can stop the bank?
Well, I think the bank is, I think the banks in that sense are, it's an antiquated thing. And there's countries that have their own financial bases that they don't rely on Western finance anymore. And I got a book behind me. It's called The House of Morgan, and it's supposed to be like a very fond examination of JP Morgan and his dynasty. And well, you know, like now that's a banker who actually in the book they describe him as not liking Jewish bankers. That's what's in the book. And but they would work, but they all work together. All of these Western bankers work together. Because at the end of the day, it was about money and power. There was no ideology. And just as you say, when they saw an opportunity to make profits, that's what they would do. So there was the world wars. It's all mentioned in the book, how they would push for that. Because they were thinking about it from their point of view and how they would profit, and they didn't care about anything else. Everything else was just game pieces on the board. They didn't look at those people going to their deaths. They just saw them as being taken off the board.
It doesn't matter to them. And this is, I've written several pieces about this, the root of all evil, the love of money, greed, avarice, and it is the thing that rides mankind, you know. And I have a book here somewhere as well. Actually, you're talking about JP Morgan. I got the Rothschilds down behind me. Again, they're painted in a kind of an admirable light. When, of course, as you've said, and as I know, it's all about avarice, and they don't care what the suffering is behind their avarice and greed and their desire to hold on to power at any cost. I wonder, do you think, again, we can intercut and chop things out if we're worried about someone coming for us in the dead of night. But I wonder what your take is on the banks, as in the Western banks, influence in China now.
I think they, like many other Western interests and concerns, I think they tried to get it. You know, let's put it this way. I have a document here from 1965. It's from the U.S. State Department's official website, the Office of the Historian, and they're talking about in 1965 of their long-standing strategy of encircling and containing China. And so there, it's 1965. So even then, that's a long time ago. But even then, they were calling it a long-standing strategy of encircling and containing China. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can just put that up there. It's interesting. And again, it's the official US State Department website, Office of the Historian. They talk about, right here, they were talking about bombing North Vietnam. They said it only makes sense if they are in support of a long-run United States policy to contain communist China. And then they compare communist China to Germany before World War I and Germany and Japan before World War II and the USSR. And then down here, they talk about a long-run effort to contain China, the three fronts, Japan and Korea, India and Pakistan, and Southeast Asia. We see this playing out to this day. And part of that was, and this is what they thought if they send all their factories and they get their banks and they sink all their hooks in, that they would be able to subordinate China to a Western-led international order. And they failed. And this back 20 years ago was a failed strategy, but they just never changed it, which is why now it's not working because it doesn't make any sense. I showed you how the trade situation has changed for every country in Southeast Asia. It's the same. Philippines, Thailand, all of them. They were all trading mostly with relatively mostly with the West. And now it's mostly with China. So everything is 180, but they've never changed their strategy accordingly.
I saw a speech by David Rothschild about 10 years ago, and he was speaking to the top flight of Harvard graduates or whoever they were. And he said, it's always been 80-20 West-East, and the future is going to be 80-20 East-West. And this is a Rothschild said this. So they knew, and they have always known. Now I'm thinking now, we've talked about the borders of China and Myanmar, even Cambodia, Laos. And now I wouldn't mind if I can pick your wonderful brain about the far Southeast. And I guess we're talking about what the next play might be in terms of Taiwan, Japan, Australia.
What is that going to get them? Look at Australia. What is it getting them? Nothing. Exactly.
Well, what's the leverage with Japan? Because I mean, you were stationed there. You would know more about Japan than most people. What's the leverage with Japan? I know with Taiwan, it's been semiconductors.
We're in uncharted waters because during the Cold War, the U.S. from the beginning and all throughout the Cold War always had a lot of advantages over the Soviet Union. Things are different with China. I fear that the discussion that they're having around planning room tables is there's a John Sudworth everywhere. Actually, I 100% agree with you, and I always kind of make this argument that China and Russia export weapons, right? They export weapons to help countries defend their physical territory. Why don't they start exporting